Good evening. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with LaRouchePAC.com. I would like to welcome everybody watching tonight to a live broadcast featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. This is a regular Friday evening broadcast from LaRouchePAC TV. Mr. LaRouche will have opening remarks tonight. We already have several very significant questions that have come in from our viewing audience, which we will take up in the subsequent discussion period. We have Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein present in the studio today to present those questions. So I welcome you to this webcast tonight. It's a very significant evening, and I'm sure you'll get a sense of exactly how significant it is from what Mr. LaRouche will say now. So without further ado, I'm proud to give you Mr. LaRouche.
Well, you know that it's about time that the Congress officially begins to dysfunction or something. And therefore, we're going to be, after this week, we're going to be bereft of the Congress out there waiting, lurking for us to hear what we have to say and to tell us what they have to say. So now we're in that period, and for many people in the past, it was usually customary for public opinion to believe that there was a hiatus in communication and in policy making between Christmas and New Year's and slightly after that. Well, that was never quite true, but today, under present conditions, that is a more significant fact than it has been usually in past times. So tonight we are celebrating, in a sense, or whatever, the end of the Congress's apparent activity in Washington, and we're going to go to a period until after the president is inaugurated or some foolish thing like that. We're going to get the Congress back functioning again, presumably. But that's all an illusion. That's all on the surface. The actual direction of society in policy making is made by a relatively few of the whole population, shall we say the adult population, or late blooming adolescents or whatever. And therefore, what the truth is that there's always something going on in the top layers of society where the real decisions are shaped. So if you take the upper 10% of the most active people who of political and similar relevance in their work, you'll find that they are generally operating intensely pretty much around the clock, and more so now than ever before, not because things are better, but because they're worse. And so therefore, to understand how politics can be shaped at a time that the average public thinks that the Congress and so forth are out of business for that time, on vacation, quite the contrary is true. They're just assembled differently. Because the fact of the matter, contrary to the belief in popular opinion, that a relatively small part of the total population has any systemic awareness of what the devil is going on in government or in other leading places. And that's the phase we're entering now, where, yes, people will be going home, they will be disappearing, they won't be gathering the way as much as they did before, but they're not gone. There still will be more than ever, a higher rate than ever, of people paying very close attention to what's going on in the world, what's going on inside the United States, in leading circles. They won't be gathering in the same way in the Congress as you're accustomed to them. They won't be actually paying much attention to the newspaper men and things like that, strange creatures of that type. But something is going on. Society functions even when most people are simply babbling and saying things that have very little relevance to the policy making of the nation. The policy making of in the nation is generally gathered around, we could say fairly approximately, not more than 10% of the total active population. So therefore, the fact that the Congress is now going to appear to disappear for a while, for a short period, a few weeks, despite that, you find that right now, more than probably in any period more recently, that while everyone seems to be sleeping, a good portion of the 10% population I referred to are very actively concerned, and probably more so than ever before. And there's good reason for that. Because we're faced, first of all, with a general financial breakdown of the whole system. We're now in the process of entering a hyperinflation beyond anything we've experienced recently in the United States and also in Europe. Whole nations in Europe are breaking apart. Portugal, gone. Not really gone, but it's breaking up. Spain, horrible conditions of a general breakup of the economy of Spain. Italy, about to go through the same kind of thing. Greece, already suffering genocide for its price of membership in the European system. We're faced with wars, new wars. Every time you turn around now, there's an intensity of the increase of war. So this is not Christmas time. Christmas time was canceled this year with a slaughter in the state of Connecticut. That took Christmas out of the equation. So the bad things are happening. The bad things to worry about are happening. And there's a small portion of the total population which really has some insight into what is happening inside the nation. People who are attempting to define what should become the policies of the nation come after the next inauguration, and then the general hoopla that goes with that. So the most important things that may shape the destiny of this nation may be happening while you're on vacation or going to visit the home folks or things like that. Because there's some people who are paying attention to business, real business, and they're worried, they're anxious. People who tend to operate with indifference with respect to what's happening in the course of the society's functioning now are not being so casual about these things. There's very little left of the spirit of routine. There's a deepening anguish, a fear, and people trying to hide their fears from themselves. And that's the time we're in now. So this is not the end of the political year. This is the most intensive part of the political year in a very long time. So look at these things in this manner. What's the nature, for example, of our role of this organization in terms of that, within that upper 10% of the people who tend to pay more attention to these matters than the rest of the population? Many people gossip. They read the press. They gossip about the press. They interpret the press. I think of little less consequence than the press. For example, for the press to tell the truth is a remarkable event. And usually they lie. That's the nature of the American press. The New York Times. I read the New York Times to find out if there's one little article in there that tells the truth of any significance. And it's one of the most prestigious, ostensibly, newspapers in the United States. And what do you get out of reading it? A headache or disgust. So there is a process in the United States of people who are more sensitive to reality than the great majority of the population. The great part of the population is conditioned not to really pay attention to what's true. That's what the kind of decision-making that has to be made at all times. But now, at the time that the Congress is assumedly dispersing, the time that people are looking for vacations, the time they're trying to believe that things aren't important, they're scratching through the newspapers trying to find out what the news is. It's the worst place to go to find news in a newspaper in this kind of period. What you're getting is not news, it's some kind of pablum or some kind of intellectual junk. That's what you get in your newspaper. They're not telling you the truth. Is your newspaper, for example, talking about the 10%, upper 10%, of people who have all grades of income, all grades of official status? They're different. But they have one common thing. They are concerned to try to know what is happening in the United States, in the world, and what they should think of doing about it. It's an upper 10%. It's a fair figure, it's a fair estimate. Most people in the United States, and this has been going on for a very long time. For example, refer to the President Jackson administration. Now, Jackson, at the time he had become president for 2 terms, was mentally not in the best condition. He was essentially a snarling old grouch. That was his function. And he had people who controlled him. And they actually made the policies. He would snarl and grouch around and things like that. But essentially, these guys, who were thieves generally, well, like a spy, one of the leading spies against the United States, ran that administration. He was the top guy. The other guys that ran the administration were also of similar status and inclinations. They were thieves and killers, traitors, and this sort of thing. But something was going on then that was not obvious in the mind of the president himself. They would listen to him and ignore him. They would talk to him and then ignore him. They would pass his orders to him. He couldn't figure out what was going on. One of the greatest and nastiest fools in U.S. history was Andrew Jackson. And just think of all these people in the United States who imagined that Andrew Jackson was something, that he was important, that he was a policymaker, that he was a thinker. A stinker, yes. A thinker, no. He did some military things, and he was largely a little bit on the criminal side. Most of the things he did were pretty shaky, pretty bad. He's a lousy character. But anyway, so we're in that environment. We have the same thing now. We have people who are really of no consequence in terms of morals, in terms of their intellectual outlook, their ideas, and they're the big shots in many cases. But mixed in all this thing, there's a core of people who apparently are varying ranks in society, who have one thing in common. They're paying attention when most people are not. Now, I'm a person who specializes in paying attention. Now, I don't pay as much attention as I used to many years ago because I need a little more rest once in a while. I think there were times when I had got no rest at all. I used to go for days without rest when I was involved in things. But I had to slow down on that a bit. But nonetheless, despite the fact of my aging process, this is still going. There still is a percentile of the population which, whether they're right or wrong, are searching for answers or for suggested answers to the problems of alarm in the state. For example, how many people in the United States are aware of the fact, which is an obvious fact, that this world is on the verge of a threatened thermonuclear war? A thermonuclear war which will be started probably by the United States under Obama. Or it's actually the British and it's Tony Blair. They're the real people who run the operation. Obama does not run the United States. He does not run the euro. He's a stooge for the British Empire. And Tony Blair is his mentor. The Tony Blair who organized the longest war ever fought on the basis of a fraudulent occasion in modern history. And these scums are the people who had run this much of things. But still, there are those of us who know that society is important. And we have to think about it, we have to talk about it, we have to constantly react to it, try to understand what's going on, despite the newspapers, despite the TV programs. We are paying attention. Whether we're right or wrong, we're paying attention, and that's the difference. And therefore now, while Congress will be going into a kind of retreat, and it would seem like the Congress is out of business, it's far from the case. People who care and people who are concerned and have the habit of caring, the habit of concern, whether they're right or wrong, are now becoming much more intensely occupied than they probably have been at most times in their past history, their own lives. And the people who are concerned are more concerned than ever. We get that from our organization, which is operating in the field, operating in various kinds of work, in the Congress, in various institutions, in various locations. We're in it all the time. And if you take the number of people that we represent, that may be small, but you think the number of people that we influence, with whom we interact, and the number of people with whom they interact in turn, you're now beginning to see the light which is all around you to be seen. That there is a process of government, which is implicit government, not necessarily the official government, but the implicit government of the opinion makers and the opinion shakers who are busy all the time. And they represent, in total, probably fairly estimated, about 10% of the population. And I can tell you that since the past several weeks, and the past months as well, there probably has been much more intensive concern among what I referred to as this 10% layer than in a very long time, because they know that people are talking about thermonuclear war. At the top level of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and similar people, and also in other nations, a very similar kind of reaction. They're constantly worried about thermonuclear war. You have general officers and colonels in the U.S. military service and intelligence services who are worried every day about the triggering of a thermonuclear war. A thermonuclear war which within 1 hour and a half can demolish the most of the population of this planet. Not only because of the bombardment, but because of the condition in the atmosphere and throughout the territory as a result of that shot. It takes 2 shots. You take the naval forces with their weapons in the Pacific and elsewhere, other systems of the similar type, and the United States has the greatest war machine ever in terms of thermonuclear weaponry. And other nations are participating in that. China is a nuclear power, thermonuclear power. Russia is a thermonuclear power. India has a thermonuclear capability of significance. Then you have a lot of smaller parts which are being pulled together in a war machine, pulled together to conduct a war. And the people of the 10%, or within the 10%, who are more active, are sensitive to this. They're afraid. What happens then, you have a larger part of the population which lives in a kind of dream world when it comes to these matters. They may have things that are important to them in their daily lives, their daily experience, their family quarrels and all this sort of stuff. But they're not thinking about reality. And what Obama is depending upon, and what the British Queen is depending upon, after all, he works for her, under the direction of Tony Blair. And what's the worrying thing is that we're going to lose everything because the general population is not paying attention to the question of thermonuclear war, which everybody in the top layer of government around the world is concerned about. And it can happen. It can happen all too easily right now. The generals are paying attention, the great generals, the major ones. Many people of other categories and statecraft are concerned with the same question. But the sleeping masses, which are living in their own separate world of unreality, are not paying attention. But some are beginning to pay attention because the inflation rate, the health care threats, these things are beginning to spread the number of people who are increasingly concerned. They have not come to think clearly yet. They're still in the old kinds of ways of thinking and behaving. So we find right now that you would say, well, the Congress is dispersed. It's out there doing something different. But that's not true. That leading circles in business, major business, financial community, other things, are desperately concerned. And since the election, or the actual election victory of Obama, the hatred of Obama is increasing rapidly. And the case of Obama's telling Susan Rice to dump it all, the orders given to her to quit, is typical of this. We're now in that kind of situation. And what's going to happen now is going to require our attention. What's our position in this upper 10% of people who actually shape the way that thinking people of the United States think, what they're concerned about? We get it all the time. Our role in this has been increasing. While the income in the nation is declining, our activity is increasing. If you take the intensity of our discussions with people in various parts of the United States and in the world, because we're influential in a certain specific way throughout the world. We're well known in matters of concern in Spain, in Portugal, in parts of Italy, what just happened in Italy, throughout the Euro system, especially in Greece, in adjoining nations, in Russia, in India, in Iran, in places in Africa controlled by the British. All these people are concerned, but it's a small part which actually focuses on the kinds of decision-making which are required to deal with the leading-edge problems of mankind. And that's what we do. And don't think that our work is not significant. It is significant because we're a minority within a minority within a minority, the third one, which is actually the upper 10% that really discusses the political policies of the United States. And we see that more clearly than others because we're there, we're inside. We're probably more anxious about these things than most people are. We're living in a world of our personal world of anxieties with all the concerns. We have all the concerns, much of the knowledge, and little of the money, and little of the other kinds of resources to deal with these things. So we're probably more concerned about these things than most people. We're involved. We're involved in the issue of thermonuclear war. We're involved in everything that's going on in the Near East. We're involved in everything that's happening in Europe. We're involved in things which are in South America. We're involved in the northern parts of Africa in particular. We're involved in these things every day of the week. And we are a part of the upper 10% of the people who really know what the hell is going on. And our role right now, from this moment on, just because the Congress is no longer gathered together, the importance of that 10% of people who care and talk about it is greater now than it ever has been in a long time.